What if Jon Snow were the only man alive who could resist the Night King's deathly power? Imagine a world where every living creature, man, woman, dragon, fell at the Night King's command except him. Now, picture this. The Battle of Winterfell had just begun, but something was wrong. The dead weren't just marching. They were listening, waiting, and in that silence they paused, not for fear, not for retreat, but for something they had never done before, hesitation. It all began in the moments leading up to the great battle. The wind howled over Winterfell like a wounded beast. Snow blew in horizontal sheets, blinding even the fiercest warriors. Jon stood at the ramparts, Ghost beside him, watching the sea of darkness move. But as the Night King approached on his undead steed, something happened. He raised his hand, his signature move, and the battlefield should have erupted with resurrected corpses. Yet when Jon stepped forward, the wights around him shuddered and stopped. Arya, perched on the wall with bow drawn, saw it too. "Why aren't they attacking him?" she whispered. No one had an answer. Below, Ser Davos signaled the front line. The Unsullied were ready, Dothraki already fallen, but now the enemy stood frozen. A strange aura surrounded Jon, not visible, not tangible, but undeniable. The Night King narrowed his eyes, cocked his head. He tried again, raising his hand, summoning death. Nothing. Jon walked into the field of corpses, like a ghost among the damned, and they parted for him. Wait, did that just happen? Yes. The Night King's magic, the very essence that turned men into puppets, had no hold over Jon Snow. No one knew why. Not yet. Samwell Tarly, watching from the crypts, scrambled the old scrolls he'd stolen from the Citadel. A line from an ancient Valyrian prophecy struck him like a blade to the chest. He who carries the blood of ice and fire shall walk untouched among the frozen dead. Back on the battlefield, Jon reached the front line. Whites swarmed around Grey Worm and Brienne, fighting to their last breath. But as Jon came closer, the dead recoiled. They staggered, some even collapsing. Jon looked down at his hands, then back up at the Night King, who now stepped forward on foot, dismounting his undead dragon with an eerie calm. You could feel it. Something was changing. Now here's where it gets insane. Instead of unleashing a wave of death, the Night King spoke. Yes, spoke, for the first time in centuries. His voice was cold steel, like frost cutting through bone. "You do not belong to them," he said, "nor to the living." Jon didn't understand. "What am I?" And the Night King replied, "You are the flaw in the design." Boom. Did that just give you chills? Everyone watching, from Sansa in the crypts to Bran in the Godswood, felt it in their bones. This wasn't just another fight for survival. This was a game-changing revelation. Jon Snow wasn't just immune. He was something else. And here's the twist. Bran knew. He'd seen it in the Weirwood visions, but told no one. Why? Because what he saw scared even him. Back in the Godswood, Bran whispered to Theon, "Jon is not what he thinks he is. Neither is the Night King." And Theon, bless his broken, loyal soul, didn't ask questions. He just nodded because deep down, everyone felt it. This war wasn't going to end in fire or ice. It was going to end in truth. Meanwhile, Daenerys had her own questions. She circled above on Drogon, watching her lover-turned-rival walk freely through the undead like some cursed savior. Rage mixed with awe in her chest. Why him? Why not me? Her destiny, once clear as dragon flame, now flickered in doubt. Tyrion noticed it too. "If the dead can't touch him," he muttered, "then maybe, just maybe he's not entirely one of us." 3 days earlier, Bran had seen an ancient vision of two forces born of the same cosmic wound, a shard of the great Other and a spark of Lawler, both cast into mortal forms, one destined to end the world, the other to stop him. That other was Jon. Now, picture this. Jon walking to the battlefield as both sides freeze in confusion. Whites turning away. Arya dropping her blade. The Hound backing off. Everyone watches him. Then suddenly, Drogon screams. Not because of the dead, but because Rhaegal, Jon's dragon, breaks free from the Night King's control midair and soars toward Jon like a loyal hound finally recognizing his master. The Night King glares up as his control falters. He steps forward, drawing his ice sword. This is it. This is the moment where the old rules don't matter anymore. The ground cracked beneath the weight of two destinies colliding. Jon stood still, feet planted on the frozen earth, as the Night King walked toward him. Around them, chaos paused. The undead army no longer advanced. The living dared not breathe. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an unraveling of everything both sides believed to be true. Regal descended from the sky, like a comet of fury, screeching toward Jon. But unlike before, he didn't attack. He hovered, wings spread wide, then landed behind Jon and bowed his head. The same dragon the Night King had once claimed now bowed to Jon Snow, not as a rider, as something more. Up on the battlements, Daenerys' hands clenched the reins of Drogon. Her eyes widened with confusion. Fury, fear. Why? She whispered. Why him? Tyrion stood beside her, silent. For once, the cleverest man in Westeros had no answers. Below, the Night King removed his armor, not out of arrogance, but necessity. This was no longer a battle between armies. This was the ancient balance reasserting itself. Fire and ice, will and fate. He raised his ice-forged blade and pointed it at Jon. You are not one of them, the Night King said again. You were never meant to live. Yet here you are, breathing. Jon didn't flinch. I didn't ask to be born, but I'll be the one to end you. The Night King struck first. He moved faster than any man should, blade slicing through the air like winter wind. Jon ducked, sidestepped, countered. His Valyrian steel sword met the Night King's ice blade, and it didn't shatter. It screamed. Sparks of frost and flame erupted from the clash, illuminating the night like a falling star. Wait, what was that? The very air between them cracked. Arya stared in awe. Bran's eyes rolled white in the godswood, visions flooding his mind faster than he could interpret. Ghosts circled the field, growling, but never daring to interfere. This wasn't a fight between two warriors. It was a war between two forces. One meant to unmake life. The other somehow made immune to death. The Night King tried to summon the dead again. He extended both hands, his face tightening in rage. The bodies around Jon trembled, then stopped. Again. Nothing. Jon roared, driving Longclaw forward. His sword grazed the Night King's side, and the unthinkable happened. The Night King bled. Not ice, not smoke. Real blood, black and thick, oozing like tar. He staggered back, eyes narrowing. For the first time in centuries, he looked afraid. Okay, pause. This is your moment to remember that the Night King has never, ever shown weakness. Not when set on fire, not when dragons attacked, not even when Bran looked directly into his soul. And yet now, Jon Snow had made him bleed, and that's when everything started to collapse. The whites shrieked. Some dropped to the ground, convulsing. Viserion, the undead dragon, lurched midair, spiraled, and smashed into the earth in a fireless explosion. The connection was breaking. Jon's strike had done more than hurt the Night King physically. He had cracked the source. Inside the godswood, Bran began to speak in tongues, ancient High Valyrian pouring from his lips. The weirwood trees trembled. A vision overtook him, of a time before time. Two beings of raw magic, one formed from ice, the other from something even the children of the forest couldn't name. Not fire, but balance. Bran saw it all. Jon wasn't immune to the Night King's power. He was the answer to it, not because of his bloodline, not because of being a Targaryen or a Stark, but because his resurrection by Melisandre had done something unintended. When she brought him back, she didn't return just Jon. She returned the counterweight. Back in the battlefield, Jon pressed forward. With every step, the army of the dead faltered. Whites clutched their heads. The air itself pulsed, as if reality were trying to adjust to something unnatural. The Night King screamed, a sound like shattering glass. He raised his blade again, swinging in desperation. Jon caught it midair with Longclaw, twisted, and drove the hilt into the Night King's chest. Not to kill him, but to pin him in place. You were never supposed to rise, Jon growled. But neither was I. And then something no one expected happened. Jon dropped his sword and stepped into the Night King. Not beside him, not around him, into him. What? Did Jon just walk into death itself? Yes. And it recoiled. The Night King staggered, hands shaking. His eyes flickered, not blue, but white now. Pure white. Jon was inside his mind, his magic, his essence. And Jon's humanity, his grief, his guilt, his pain, was poison to it. This wasn't a duel of strength. It was soul versus void. And Jon was winning. Daenerys leapt down from Drogon, running toward them. She didn't know what she would do, only that she had to reach him. The battlefield was collapsing around them. Whites turned on each other, snow melting in concentric rings around Jon and the Night King. Dragons roared. Bran's voice echoed across the wind in a language no one understood. Jon finally spoke again. One word. Now! At that moment, Rhaegal let loose a scream that shattered the clouds, and Drogon joined him. The two dragons unleashed their fire, pure, untainted, not the Night King, but the sky above them. The flame burned into the heavens like a signal, a flare, a call, and from far, far north, beyond even the lands of always winter, something answered. You still with me? Because what just woke up beyond the wall makes the Night King look like a child throwing snowballs. The sky didn't burn. It split. When Drogon and Rhaegal sent their fire screaming into the heavens, the clouds didn't merely part. They shattered, revealing a swirling blackness above, deeper than night, older than the stars. It wasn't just the sky changing. It was a world recognizing something that hadn't stirred in thousands of years. And far beyond the wall, in the forgotten heart of the land of always winter, something opened his eyes. Back at Winterfell, the Night King convulsed, the black blood oozing faster now, steam rising from his icy skin. Jon stepped back, breath ragged, not from exhaustion, but from pressure, like a mountain was pressing on his chest. He staggered, blinking hard. His vision blurred, colors dimmed, sounds twisted. Something was wrong. Bran gasped in the godswood, fingers digging into the roots beneath him. "It's awake," he muttered, voice hollow. The deep cold. Sam, still hidden in the crypts, read the scroll again. A passage now made horrible sense. When the Fire Walker meets the Frozen One, the sky shall scream, and the true dark will stir. He dropped the scroll, hands trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was never just about the Night King. Let me say that again. The Night King was never the final threat. He was a lock on the door. Jon unknowingly had become the key, and the door was now open. As the black sky churned above, the entire battlefield shook. A shockwave rippled out from the center, where Jon and the Night King stood. Whites fell to ash. The ground cracked. The godswood bent. Even Drogon and Rhaegal staggered, wings faltering mid-flight. Jon dropped to one knee, clutching his chest. He felt it. Something else was trying to enter him, not the Night King's power. Something worse. Arya sprinted toward him, needle in hand. "Jon!" she yelled. "What's happening?" He looked up, and for a moment his eyes flickered white, then blue, then back to brown. "I can feel it," he said quietly. "It's calling me." "Wait, what? Calling him?" "Yeah, not with words. With instinct. With need. And here's where it gets darker than we thought. The deep cold isn't a person. It's not a king. It's a force. Older than the first man. Older than the children. Even older than the magic that created the Night King. It's a primal hunger. An intelligence born in the first breath of winter, buried under the snow so deep, time forgot it. But now, Jon had reached too far. When he connected with the Night King's essence, he touched the source, and the source touched back. Inside Jon's mind, images flashed. Not memories. Warnings. Cities buried in ice. Oceans frozen mid-wave. Dragons falling from the sky like snowflakes. And worst of all, himself, standing atop a frozen iron throne, eyes like dying stars. He screamed, and the Night King, what was left of him, smiled. Because this was the plan all along. The Night King hadn't tried to kill Jon. He'd tried to break him open, to pierce the shell that kept the deep cold locked away. Jon was never immune. He was a gate. Back in the Godswood, Bran collapsed. Theon caught him just in time. Bran's mouth moved, barely audible. We were wrong. Jon wasn't our weapon. He was theirs. Meanwhile, Daenerys reached Jon's side. She knelt, grabbed his shoulders. What did he do to you? Jon's eyes locked with hers, and for a terrifying second, she saw nothing familiar. Just depth. Cold, endless depth. But then he blinked, and Jon returned. I can stop it, he said. Daenerys pulled back, wary. Stop what? Jon rose to his feet. The cold, whatever it is, it wants in. Through me. Arya stepped between them. Then we kill it before it takes you. But it wasn't that simple. Jon pointed north. It's coming. Not an army. Not walkers. Not the dead. Something else. A storm that thinks. You still with me? Because now we're in a whole new game. The Night King? Just the warning label. What's coming next? Doesn't follow rules. Doesn't care about thrones or dragons. Doesn't need soldiers. It consumes. And guess what? It's already here. A chill swept across Winterfell, darker than any wind. Fires sputtered. Walls cracked. And in the far distance, above the shattered clouds, an eye opened. Not human. Not beast. Just hunger. Arya looked up and whispered, What in the seven hells is that? Daenerys gripped Jon's hand, tighter than ever. If you're the gate, can you shut it? Jon didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure the gate could be closed anymore. Far beyond shattered skies and frozen lands, deeper than any man, magic, or memory had ever dared to reach, the deep cold stirred. It didn't move like a creature. It didn't walk or fly. It simply was unfolding across the world like a thought, instant and overwhelming. And the first place it touched? Bran. He woke screaming the Godswood, the sound foreign and terrifying. His eyes were still white, rolled back, but his voice was again raw and full of fear. Theon recoiled as the roots around Bran blackened, frost seeping up from the ground. Something was inside him, not the Night King's touch, not a vision, a presence. He wasn't seeing it anymore. It was seeing him. Sam, desperate to make sense of what was happening, poured to the old Valyrian scrolls once hidden by maesters who feared their contents. He found a passage not spoken in Westeros for thousands of years. It didn't describe the long night. It described what came before it. Before death had formed, there was cold without name. It wore no face. It bore no will. It devoured gods and left silence behind. Even light fled its gaze. Sam read the line aloud, barely able to breathe. This thing, it didn't create the Night King. He looked up at Gilly, wide-eyed. It made everything afraid of the dark. Meanwhile, Jon stood on the crumbling battlefield, feeling less like a man with each breath. Rhaegal hovered protectively above him, but even a dragon seemed nervous now, wings twitching, eyes darting skyward, like some instinct beyond training told him this wasn't war. It was extinction. Daenerys watched Jon from a distance, whispering to herself, If he opens that gate fully, there's no Westeros left. Arya gripped her dagger tighter. Then we make sure it doesn't happen. But here's where it gets wild. Jon could feel the cold inside everyone. Not like infection. Not like disease. More like truth. A fundamental thread that connected every living thing. Like the universe had always harbored this rot under the skin. And Jon, resurrected, reborn, reforged in fire and shadow, was the only one who could hear it whisper. You are the balance. The voice echoed in his skull. Let me through, and I will burn away what never belonged. Burn, not freeze. And this was a twist. The deep cold didn't just bring ice. It cleansed. It erased the lie of light, of memory, of grief. It offered Jon the one thing he'd never had, peace. And peace, to a man like Jon Snow, was temptation. Bran, still locked in his mind, was fighting a losing war. Inside his vision, he saw an image no one else would believe. A weirwood tree twisted into black ice, crying blood, surrounded by dead gods. In the center of it all stood two figures. One was the Night King. The other, Jon, but not as he was. As he would become, if the cold won. And Bran understood this wasn't a prophecy. It was a choice. At that very moment, in the dark edges of the north, the wall between worlds thinned further. The Weeping Hollow, a cursed land even the Night's Watch never dared explore, cracked open like an egg. Creatures poured forth, not wights, not walkers, but things without form. Shimmering figures made of frozen time, their voices echoing backwards, speaking in words that felt like regret. These were the first forgotten, the deep cold's original harbingers. Jon collapsed as their presence reached his mind. Visions flooded again, Dany dying in his arms, Arya alone in a ruined Winterfell, Tyrion hanging by wildfire-soaked ropes, dragons falling into black oceans. And in all of them, Jon stood untouched, alone, eternal. He clutched his head, screamed into the snow, "Get out of me!" But the voice replied, "You let me in the moment you died." That was it, the resurrection. When Melisandre brought him back, she didn't use fire alone. She had invoked balance. And in doing so, cracked open the door the cold had waited millennia to breach. It had chosen Jon, because Jon was never meant to return. And now, he was its vessel. But wait, what happens if he accepts it? Bran's vision shifted again. A final path, a final choice. Jon opens a gate willingly, and the deep cold doesn't freeze the world. It remakes it. Every kingdom gone, every throne shattered. No more pain, war, hunger, just stillness, perfect stillness. Back in reality, Daenerys reached Jon, saw his hands trembling. She dropped to her knees in front of him, grabbed his face. "Look at me," she whispered. "You're still here." He looked at her, and something flickered. A tear. Real. Human. Jon. But the cold was right behind it, whispering, "Let her go. Let them all go. Be peace." You guys still watching? Because this is the moment that breaks hearts. Jon leaned forward, touched his forehead to hers, and said, "If I lose this fight, I need you to kill me." Daenerys' breath caught. "No, you have to promise me." Arya stood just behind her, dagger ready. And this time, she nodded. Jon turned to face the north again, eyes glowing faintly. "Then I'm going to meet it halfway." And he walked alone toward the Weeping Hollow, where the cold waited, not as an enemy, but as something he might become. The snow didn't crunch beneath Jon's boots anymore. It surrendered. Each step he took into the Weeping Hollow erased more than footprints. It erased warmth, thought, color. Even the wind dared not follow him. Behind him, Winterfell shrank, not in size, but in meaning. The world he knew was fading. And he wasn't sure if that was a threat or a gift. The air was thick, not with snow, not with mist, but memory. Jon felt them first, whispers brushing against his ears, light as spiderwebs, sharp as blades. You let your brother die. You killed the woman who loved you. You chose the wall over the world. He gritted his teeth, fists clenched, eyes forward. He knew these voices, but they weren't lies. That's what made it worse. They were true. The deep cold didn't trick him. It reminded him. It understood him. And it offered silence in return. Behind him, Arya stared into the hollow, unable to move beyond the edge. Her blade shook in her hand for the first time since she was a child. "He's not coming back, is he?" she whispered. "No," Bran said softly, appearing behind her in his wheelchair, eyes darkened with something deeper than vision. But something else might. Let's pause for a second, because here's where the lore flips upside down. Bran had always seen the past, but now he began to remember things he never lived. Not because he was a three-eyed raven, but because the deep cold was waking him up too. He looked at Arya and said, "I was never meant to be human, just a vessel." Arya turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Bran took a deep breath. "The children of the forest didn't just create the Night King. They created me." "What?" "Okay, hold that. We've always known the children plunged dragonglass into a man's heart to stop the first men. But what Bran had never told anyone, because even he only saw it in flashes, was that they tried more than once. The Night King was their first experiment. Bran was the last. But the difference? Where the Night King was created with ice, Bran was forged with root and time, not meant to fight, but to watch, to record everything the world ever was, and one day choose whether it deserved to keep existing. He had failed to stop the Long Night. He had failed to save Theon, Hodder, countless others. And now he knew why. Because he was never supposed to interfere. The deep cold whispered it to him now. You were the archive, not the judge. But he is. Back in the hollow, Jon reached its heart, a vast clearing open before him, surrounded by blackened trees twisted like corpses frozen mid-scream. In the center stood no throne, no monster, no god, just a mirror, circular, floating, made of what looked like frozen light. And in its reflection, Jon saw everything, not his face, his potential. In one image, he stood atop a shattered red keep, crowned in ice, Daenerys' skull at his feet. In another, he sat beneath the weirwood, vines growing through his veins as he replaced Bran, eyes glassy, endless. In a third, he knelt before Arya, blade through his own heart, the world burning behind her, 1,000 outcomes, 1,000 fates. And the cold whispered, choose none. Be still, be peace. This was a trap, not domination, not death, relief, because Jon Snow was tired of battle, of loss, of carrying everyone's hope and pain and prophecy. The cold offered him a place where nothing hurt, where nothing mattered. Meanwhile, back at Winterfell, Daenerys made her choice. She mounted Drogon, and without a word to anyone, flew into the hollow. Because if Jon Snow was going to disappear into the dark, she would follow him, even if it meant burning the sky itself. As she passed over the treetops, the cold reached for her. It tried to trick her with visions, her son Rhaego alive and laughing, her brother Viserys crowning her with gold, lovingly, her father holding her like a child and whispering, I was proud. She screamed, lies! And Drogon roared fire into clouds. The cold recoiled. That's when Bran realized the truth. Daenerys wasn't immune, but she wasn't vulnerable either, because her flame, unlike Rhaegar's fire, was born of fury, of pain, of loss, so absolute it turned into armor. The deep cold could not break what was already shattered and reforged. She found Jon at the mirror. He didn't look at her. I can end it, he whispered. No more war. No more hunger. No more thrones. She landed beside him, softly. And no more us? That made him blink. I'm not me anymore, Dany. You are, she said, stepping closer. Because only Jon Snow would try to carry the weight of the world again. He looked at the mirror. The cold whispered louder now. It screamed in hunger. She grabbed his hand. You made a mistake before. You killed the woman who loved you to save the world. Don't let the world kill the man she loved. Boom. That's the line. Jon's eyes welled up. His breath trembled. And the mirror cracked. Just slightly. A hairline fracture. Because in that moment, he chose pain. He chose being human. The deep cold didn't scream. It howled. The hollow shuddered. The black trees collapsed. The creatures, the first forgotten, shrieked and twisted into snow. The mirror shattered, and Jon fell to his knees. Behind him, the sky lit up again. Bran had unleashed the ravens. The dragons circled. Arya and Sam rode north with fire-blessed steel. And from the shattered roots of the godswood, a light began to grow. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time, Westeros had a chance. Because Jon Snow didn't open the gate. He broke it. Winter wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. Not in falling snow or silent nights, but in the form of a living, breathing storm, rolling across Westeros with the vengeance of the god that had been denied its resurrection. After Jon shattered the mirror, after he refused the deep cold's offer, the hollow collapsed behind him like a dying star. The wind didn't blow anymore. It screamed. From the far north of the waters off Dragonstone, the sky darkened in ways that no maester had ever recorded. This wasn't weather. It was retaliation. The deep cold was no longer subtle, no longer whispering. It had been invited and rejected, and it was angry. Back at Winterfell, the walls began to groan. The stones cracked, not from catapult fire or siege, but from pressure. Air thickened. Breath turned to ice inside lungs. Every fire in every hearth died at once. Gendry tried to relight a torch, but the flame froze the second it appeared. Tyrion, watching from the battlements, whispered, "This isn't a battle. This is extinction." Meanwhile, Arya stared toward the north, blade in hand, but this time she wasn't ready to run in. She'd seen Jon return from the Hollow, alive but changed. His face was the same. His voice was his own. But behind his eyes, something had been left behind. Something still watching. Bran knew it. He could feel the cold burrowing through reality, clawing at time itself. He gathered what remained of the ravens, thousands of them, and sent them in every direction, to warn the world, to remember, to witness. But here's where it gets darker. The deep cold didn't need bodies. It didn't raise armies. It erased them. Whole forests turned to crystal and shattered under their own silence. Villages were found where every single person had simply stopped, standing in place. Eyes open, skin white as bone. Not dead, not alive, just paused. Back in King's Landing, word arrived. "What do you mean they're frozen standing up?" Queen Sansa asked, reading the Raven Scroll. "The entire Riverlands?" Brienne nodded. "And the Dread Fort? Gone. No battle. No fire. Just silence." Tyrion poured himself a drink he didn't even want. "The gods are gone," he muttered, "and something colder took their place." Here's where his arc takes a turn. Tyrion, always a cynic, always a strategist, faced a new dilemma, a final, horrifying choice. There were wildfire caches hidden beneath every major city. King's Landing, White Harbor, Ghost Town, Old Town, Cersei's final legacy. Tyrion had uncovered them when he took power. He never used them. But now, he wondered, if the cold is coming, if the cold can't be fought, would fire be mercy? You feel that? That's the weight of impossible choice. And Tyrion, broken and brilliant, wrote just 3 words on a sealed scroll to be sent by Raven: fire before silence. Meanwhile, Jon and Daenerys returned to Winterfell. But it wasn't the same place anymore. The gods who was dying. The weirwood trees turned gray, their blood-red leaves frozen mid-fall. Jon stood before Bran, who sat motionless under the last weirwood, now barely breathing, his skin pale, his lips cracked. Bran looked up, and for the first time in years, he sounded human. "I saw the last truth," Bran whispered. Jon knelt. "Tell me." And Bran said, "The Night King wasn't the first. He was the last guard." "What?" "You heard that right. The Night King, for all his horror, was never the final evil. He was a plug in the drain, keeping the deep cold sealed beneath the skin of the world. His death at Arya's hand didn't save Westeros. It doomed it. His magic was a chain," Bran continued, "one forged by the children. They created him not to conquer, but to contain." Jon's voice broke. "We killed the lock." Bran nodded. "And now the door is wide open. Cut to Sam at the Citadel ruins, digging through ancient forbidden tomes. His hands are frostbitten, ink frozen in the wells, but he finds it, a scroll written in both Valyrian and a language even older. It doesn't talk about defeating the cold. It talks about binding it. One phrase stands out: balance must be broken to be restored. A soul of fire must walk into the heart of ice, willingly. Guess what? That means someone has to walk into the center of the storm, not to fight it, but to contain it. And that someone? It can't be just Jon anymore, because now that he's rejected the cold, it sees him as a threat. It's adapting, evolving. And here's the kicker. It's taken form again, in the ruins of Hardhome. Survivors report something new. A man, cloaked in shadow, skin of glass, eyes that reflect every fear you've ever had. He speaks in every language at once. He is the cold now. Jon stares north. He doesn't blink. He doesn't breathe for several seconds. "He's coming," he says. And Arya, by his side, simply whispers, "Then we end it, or we end with it." The horizon was gone, not just obscured, erased. The sky and the earth had fused into one shapeless mass of gray. No sunrise, no shadow, just a cold so deep it didn't numb, it hollowed. At the center of it all stood the man-shaped thing born in the ruins of Hardhome. He had no name, not one the tongue could speak. His body shimmered with frost and ash. Translucent skin stretched over something that seemed to shift with every heartbeat of the world. His eyes weren't blue. They weren't even eyes. They were reflections of your worst truth. When he walked, the ground beneath him died. Not froze, not burned, died. No moss, no rot, just stillness. And he was heading south. Bran saw it all from beneath the last weirwood. Breath shallow, tears frozen to his cheeks. "He's not like the Night King," he whispered. "He doesn't want the throne, or revenge. He just wants everything to stop." Jon stood near, watching the sky churn like a wound. "And he'll get it, unless we do what has to be done." Daenerys turned to him, voice sharp. "Then say it." Jon met her eyes. "I go into the storm. Alone?" "No." Arya's hand gripped Longclaw before Jon could even finish. "You're not doing this alone again. We followed you through death, through betrayal, through the wall and back. So if this is your end..." Jon interrupted her, quietly. "It might not be just mine, because here's where the twist tightens. The old scroll Sam found spoke not of one sacrifice, but of two. Fire and shadow must enter the cold together. Twin lights, born in blood, must bind the dark. Sam arrived from the citadel with cracked hands, frost by his beard, but eyes wide with dread. "I think it means you and her." He looked at Arya. Arya blinked. "I'm not fire." Sam shook his head. "No, you're shadow." It made a terrible kind of sense. Jon reborn in flame, kissed by Lawloress light. Arya, trained in darkness, shadow dancer death, the girl who walks unseen. Together, they were balance. Together, they were the final key. Tyrion, meanwhile, sat before the wildfire vaults in King's Landing. He held the torch in one hand and the raven scroll in the other. "If they fail," he whispered, "I have to succeed, even if it means lighting the pyre myself." Varys, yes, even Varys, alive, pulled from the shadows by Sam's plea, stood beside him. "Isn't that what kings do? Burn kingdoms to save them?" Tyrion exhaled. "I was never a king, just a man who had to choose which horror to live with." And in the north, the final march began. Jon, Arya, regal above them. Behind, Daenerys watched, her heart torn in half. She'd already lost him once. She wasn't sure she could survive it again. Jon turned to her. "If I don't come back..." She stopped him with a kiss. "Then no one does." Now picture this. Jon and Arya ride into the storm. The cold burns. The shadows whisper. And then he appears. The nameless. The embodiment of the deep cold. He doesn't threaten. Doesn't gloat. He simply steps aside and opens his arms. A welcome. A homecoming. Jon grips Longclaw. Arya grips Needle. The nameless speaks. Not in sound. In feeling. Give in. Rest. No more war. No more sorrow. No more thrones. Jon lowers his sword just an inch. Arya's breath catches. "Don't you dare." But Jon isn't hesitating. He's tricking. He grabs Arya's hand. Flame and shadow intertwined. And he says the words that the cold never expected. "We choose pain." Boom. The storm around them convulses. The nameless figure shrieks, not in fear, but in rage. Jon and Arya are swallowed in light. Not heat, not fire. Something else. Will. Bran feels it across the world. In the Godswood, he stands. Stands, for the first time since falling from that tower, and opens his eyes. They glow not white, but gold. "They've done it," he whispers. "They're inside." Inside what? The core. The cold wasn't just spreading. It was anchored to a place between life and death, a hollow in the world where magic first bled. Jon and Arya now stand there, and the Nameless comes for them. It's not a fight. It's a reckoning. The Nameless shows Jon every life he's taken, every lie he's lived, every death he's caused. And Jon takes it. Doesn't flinch. Because guilt means he still feels. He's still human. Arya sees every face she wore. Every name she ended. She nearly buckles. But then she remembers Syrio. What do we say to the god of death? She breathes. Not today. Together, they place their blades in the earth and speak the final words. We are not yours. The core shatters. The nameless screams. And the cold is unbound, but not released, redirected, contained, within Jon and Arya. Not dead, not gone, but trapped by choice. Their eyes go white. Their breath stops. They kneel, not in surrender, in victory. And just like that, the storm stops. Everywhere. From White Harbor to Dorne, the storm had passed, but silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like the world holding its breath. Snow melted slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure it was allowed to. The sky regained color. Not blue, not gold, but something between, like dawn tried to remember how to rise. People stepped out of hiding. From Winterfell to Dorne, farmers, soldiers, children. They emerged blinking into a new world that didn't roar with fire or freeze with death. But Jon and Arya were gone. Their names were whispered like prayers or warnings. The man of fire and the girl's shadow had walked into the storm and never walked out. At Winterfell, Daenerys stood at the gate every sunrise, waiting, hoping, dreading. She didn't speak much anymore. Not since the day Rhaegal returned without a rider, circling once above the castle before disappearing into the clouds. Bran confirmed what everyone feared. They're not dead, he said, but they're not here. And here's where it gets heavy. They weren't banished to some hellish realm. They became the lock. Fire and shadow now pulsed deep beneath the world's skin, wrapped around the deep cold like chains made of choice. The storm could never return unless both of them were destroyed. They had saved Westeros by becoming its prisoners. And with the cold gone, power reared its head again. The Iron Throne had been melted by Drogon long ago, but thrones never really die. They just change shape. Sansa called the great houses to Winterfell, not for war, but for what came next. Tyrion arrived from King's Landing, exhausted, pale, thinner than ever. The game is over, he told them. We saw what power nearly cost us. Gendry spoke up. So what we build now? And for the first time in Westerosi history, they chose something different. No king, no queen, no ruler born from blood or dragons. Instead, each region ruled itself. A council formed, not of lords, but of voices. Tyrion became its first chancellor, begrudgingly. I wanted to drink myself to death, he muttered. Now I'm designing a tax system. Brienne was named Protector of the Realm, not just Knight Commander, but moral compass. Sam returned to the Citadel. Now it's Grand Maester, writing the new history, not of kings and conquest, but of sacrifice and truth. And Bran, he disappeared. Some say he walked into the woods one night and never returned. Others believe he shed his skin like a snake, becoming something older, wiser, watching through the roots of the world. But it was Daenerys whose decision shook the realm. She could claim power. Rhaegal still answered to her. The people whispered, "Queen," whenever she passed. But she didn't want the throne anymore. She walked into Godswood, placed her palm on the weirwood tree, and whispered, "I was never meant to rule. I was meant to burn. And now I choose to rise." She left Winterfell that night, alone. Some say she sailed east, beyond Asshai, searching for ancient fire magic. Others say she hunts for a way to bring Jon back, or Arya, or both. But no one knows for sure, because peace isn't dramatic. It's slow. It's full of compromise and small pains. The songs they sang weren't of kings and dragons anymore. They sang of a brother and sister, not by blood, but by fate, who walked into death and taught it to feel. Let's talk about Tyrion one more time. He never forgave himself for planning wildfire as a backup, for almost choosing destruction over despair. That scroll he wrote, he burned it. Instead, he built a statue in the middle of the new council chamber. It bore no face, no name, just a sword in one hand, a dagger in the other, a flame and a shadow carved into stone. And beneath it, one line, "They chose pain so we could choose peace." Now here is where Bran's final truth lands. Before he vanished, he left behind a message, not a vision, not a warning, a choice. It said, "The cold still exists. It always will. Balance is not eternal. It's maintained." And he gave instructions. Every 100 years, 2 souls must be chosen, 2 people to take up the watch, not at the wall, but at the root of the world, to stand guard, to feel the cold, to remind it that humanity still endures. That's what Jon and Arya had become. Not ghosts, not gods, keepers. And as the years passed, new stories were told. New heroes rose. But no one ever forgot the day when winter tried to erase everything, and 2 broken souls stood between the end and a second chance. Decades passed. Peace became ordinary. Children grew up never knowing the weight of winter's silence, never fearing shadows that whispered their names. The world turned softer and slower, and the memory of the storm became myth. But myths are dangerous things. In the east, across the shattered ruins of Illyria, something stirred beneath the smoking sea. Not cold, not fire, curiosity. A ship called the Embercaller, captained by a bold young adventurer named Niravelos, reached the old Valyrian coastline. Her crew wasn't after gold or steel. They were after secrets. Specifically, the kind of magic the world had buried, hoping never to see again. And they found it, deep in a submerged vault. Shielded by obsidian and death, they uncovered scrolls too ancient for translation and relics that hummed with power. But the one thing they took that should never have been touched, a shard of something not quite ice, not quite crystal, a remnant of the core. Back in Westeros, no one noticed, yet Tyrion had passed peacefully years before, buried beneath the flaming shadow statue he once commissioned. Sam had rewritten the histories, sanitizing the horrors for the sake of the children. Brienne led a quiet life training young defenders in the Vale. Sansa ruled the North not as a queen, but as a steward of memory. But the world had grown comfortable, and comfort forgets, until strange things started happening. First, in the Reach, entire vineyards covered in frost overnight, even in summer, crops frozen in place, livestock standing still, unblinking. Then in Old Town, maesters found their ink wells freezing mid-script. One collapsed while copying a scroll, eyes wide, whispering a single word before death. Jon. Gendry, now the leader of Storm's End and a reluctant member of the realm's rotating council, received a raven from the east. One line, the shard speaks. It knows the names. That's when Bran returned. No longer a man, no longer needing a body. The ravens gathered across Westeros one stormless night, perched on rooftops and windowsills, in every town, every castle, and in the voice of a boy who had seen too much, they spoke. The cold remembers. It hadn't been destroyed. It had been contained, bound by Jon and Arya, locked behind will and pain. But now, someone had broken the mirror again. Someone had touched the wound. And just like that, the watch had to begin once more. But Jon and Arya, they weren't mortal anymore. They couldn't return on their own. They had become part of the core, part of the world's soul. And only one thing could awaken them, a sacrifice. Back in the east, Niravelos and her crew had grown mad. The shard whispered in sleep, reflected their fears, their regrets. It fed not on power, but on memory. They became its heralds, unknowing, infected, obsessed. A new cult emerged, quiet, hidden, called themselves the Sons of Stillness. Their belief? That Jon and Arya were false guardians. That true peace comes when the cold is no longer caged, but freed. They marched west, slowly, carefully, and the skies grew gray again, not with weather, with warning. At Winterfell, a young girl named Elia Snow, named after a hero no one remembered well, stood beneath the godswood. Her breath came short, her hands shook, and her blood hummed. She was Jon's granddaughter, and Arya's goddaughter, born of shadow and fire, bound by prophecy forgotten. The gods would whisper to her, not in words, but in feeling, a pull, north, atop the wall, now merely a ceremonial border. Fire pits began to freeze again. The night fort cracked, and from beneath the stones, an ancient voice groaned. You let them sleep too long. Sansa received Bran's message via Raven. She read it in silence, then lit a torch that hadn't burned in 30 years. The flame turned blue. The cold wasn't coming back by force. It was being invited. And somewhere, beneath the earth, beyond the veil, deep in the realm of what had been forgotten, Jon opened his eyes. They glowed. Not blue, not white, golden. He whispered only one word, Arya, and she answered. And so it began again, not with war drums or dragon fire, not with swords or kings, but with a feeling, a chill beneath the skin, a silence that came too soon, a name whispered in dreams. Elia Snow, the girl no one expected, the girl the cold feared. She stood alone beneath the godswood as snowflakes fell without season. But these flakes didn't melt. They hovered, suspended midair, watching, and the tree it bled again, red sap from white bark, like the old gods themselves were waking from a dream. In her veins, fire stirred. In her shadow, something ancient moved. And across the world, two souls awakened. Jon stood in a place with no sky, no floor, no beginning. Only stillness. Not death, something beyond it. His body glowed faintly, flesh and light stitched together by pain remembered. He turned slowly, and she was already there. Arya, hair streaked with silver, eyes still sharp but haunted. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. They had felt the world crack again, felt the tether snap. The shard was touched, Jon said quietly. Arya nodded. And the cold remembers us. Jon looked toward nothing. Then it's time. But leaving the core wasn't just walking away. It was giving up peace. Pain would return. Memories would bleed. The weight of the world would settle on their shoulders once more. And they both stepped forward anyway. Back in Westeros, the skies wept. Lightning split the air in silence. Children screamed from dreams of forests made of glass. Maesters found themselves writing scrolls they didn't remember beginning. And the sons of stillness? They marched through the riverlands now, growing stronger. Every town they passed, they left behind frozen wells, shuttered homes, and silence. Always silence. Their leader, Nira Velos, no longer looked human. Skin like polished ice, hair the color of forgotten bone, and a voice that echoed in reverse. We will unbind the peace they forced upon us, she said, and the world will know freedom and stillness. But Elia had seen what that freedom cost. In visions, in blood, in her very soul. She carried Jon's blood in her heart, Arya's fire in her rage. And she was not going to run. Sansa stood beside her now, older but unshaken. This is your choice, she said. No throne to offer, no legacy to protect. Only the world or the end of it. Elia stepped forward. And across the shattered wall, the core opened. Jon and Arya returned, not as mortals, not as gods, but as balance. The ground shivered, the cold recoiled, and the people remembered. They arrived at the Weeping Hollow, where it had all begun. Jon's feet touched the earth, and the snow pulled away from him like a tide. Arya's eyes met the sky, and it stopped moving. And waiting for them at the heart of the hollow was Nira. She didn't bow, didn't speak. She only raised her hand and shattered the shard. The cold screamed, not like before, not rage. This was hunger. It poured into the hollow, black mist rising like a tidal wave, seeking to reclaim what had escaped it. Jon grabbed Arya's hand. Together, he said. She nodded. Always. They stepped into the storm one final time. Elia watched, shaking, heart ready to burst. Sansa whispered, Now, child, now. Elia raised a dagger forged of Illyrian steel and dragonglass, tempered in wildfire and tears. The blade had no name, only a purpose. She plunged it into the earth. The world lit up. From Dorne to the neck, from the Vale to the ruins of Illyria, a pulse of balance spread outward, wave after wave of stillness. not born of cold, but of harmony. The core collapsed, the cold shattered, and the storm ended. For good, Nera vanished, her final breath turning to light. The suns of stillness crumbled where they stood. The skies cleared, and Jon and Arya were gone, but not lost. In every godswood, two shadows stood at sunrise, one tall, cloaked in flame, one small with eyes like knives. Watchers, guardians, not legends, eternal truths. And Elia Snow, daughter of none, heir to all, walked back into Winterfell not as a queen, but as the first protector of peace in a world that had finally earned it.